The sheer military brilliance and might of the Sith should never be underestimated. As beings whose religion is entirely based around strength and conquest, you can bet that they pay special attention to what they fight with on the front lines. A lot of the time, we pay attention to the actual saber-wielding Sith warriors themselves, or perhaps even the armies that they command. But as its name suggests, most battles in Star Wars are fought among the stars themselves. Massive fleets going head-to-head in grand naval combat has been a staple of galactic warfare for thousands of years. But what we are interested in today is the actual ships that they used. We were inspired by Darth Maul's scimitar, and that ship's own dark history in the lore. So we wanted to know what Sith-created warships actually looked like in the ancient era of the Sith. So today, let's open our data logs and take a look at 3 different eras of Sith warships. The Golden Age of the Sith, Darth Revan's Sith Armada, and the fleets of Darth Vitiat's reconstituted empire. But before we jump to hyperspace, our scanners are showing that we have a few stowaways. Many of you who are watching are not yet subscribed. This is but one of the many briefings we have on the Sith's weapons and technology, and we would be remiss if you were woefully unprepared to face them in battle. So set your targeting computer on the subscribe button and blast it to pieces so that you're notified when we post more datacrons on the ruthless weaponry of the dark side. Now acolytes, let us begin. The best place to begin looking at the Sith's ships is to go all the way back to when they made their very first appearance in lore. We have very little information on what the ancient Sith actually used for warships, as they commandeered Rakatan technology and simply used that for thousands of years before developing their own naval ships. With that said, the first look at their fleet actually comes in the Great Hyperspace War, around 5000 BBY. This was a pretty primitive era for starships in general, not just for the Sith. While hyperdrive technology was well in use by this point, the ships themselves were still a bit rustic, and the technology had not advanced very far. For instance, they weren't able to go through landing sequences by themselves. They had ropes which were deployed from the underside of the vessels. The ropes then deployed to a landing crew, which would help guide the ship in safely. But this wouldn't stop the Sith Empire from developing powerful vessels of war, such as the Darafan-class battleship. This mighty ship was the primary capital warship used by the old Sith Empire. They were carried by all of the strongest Sith Lords in all of their own personal fleets. The word Darafan is an ancient Sith tongue word meaning devourer. The battleship was named after a dark side creature, a creature capable of consuming the thoughts and experiences of living beings, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell. For their era, these battleships were exceptionally powerful. On average, they were about 215 meters in length, which for reference is roughly a fifth of the length of the Republic Venator-class Star Destroyer. By many modern standards, they were fairly small and slow, but in their heyday, they were some of the most powerful and fearsome ships in the entire galaxy. Interestingly, they do not have any deflector shields, but instead had incredibly heavy armor. It was said that just one Darafan would succumb to the firepower of no less than 6 Republic warships. This shows the expert craftsmanship of the Zaguruk builders of the Sith purebloods. The Zaguruk were the craftsmen and the artisans of the ancient Sith Empire. Long ago, their talents had been mostly put towards construction of grand tombs which housed the bones of their ancient Sith kings and overlords. But when Ajunta Pal and the other Dark Jedi took over, in addition to remaking the Sith, they remade the Zaguruk into the construction of warships and weaponry instead. The armor of a Darafan-class battleship is a testament to their skill and their craftsmanship. As far as armament goes, the Darafan was loaded out with 6 auto blasters, 3 starboard side and 3 on the port. Auto blasters were the archaic ancestors of blaster cannons. They were specifically pioneered by the Sith. They weren't very accurate to begin with at all, but they were extremely powerful and devastating. Sith admirals employed the tactic of using the Darafan's power armor to get up close to an enemy fleet, to get as close to them as possible in fact, before unleashing a hailstorm of broadside cannon fire from their auto blasters. They were also outfitted with 3 heavy concussive missile launchers on the front, which typically carried a payload of around 60 missiles at a time. Their small size also meant a small crew as well, as it only required about 25 Sith to properly crew the ship. However, it had enough space to house up to 850 soldiers. The most powerful Darafan-class battleship to exist, however, was the Corsair, Naga Sadow's flagship. The Corsair had been specially modified by Sadow himself, and could only be piloted by a gifted Sith sorcerer. This was completed by tapping into an array of force-enhancing magic crystals that took place of a main console, Using these crystals, it had the ability to pull the heart out of stars which powered the ship's weaponry. Naga Sadow escaped from the Republic in this very ship when the Sith Empire fell, and he would bury it on Yavin 4. The Corsair was later discovered by Exar Kun, who would utilize it as his own flagship. He was later deceived by one of his own treacherous followers into using it on the Kron Cluster. The Kron Cluster was a collection of 10 unstable stars which lay near the Ossus system. By pulling the hearts out of these stars to power the Corsair, it caused them all to go supernova. This of course destroyed the valuable ship, but it rid Exar Kun of his treacherous subordinate, and it devastated the world of Ossus, destroying the Jedi's second home. This wasn't the only use of Sith magic that Naga Sadow employed within his fleet. Among his grand array of warships, he placed his Sith meditation sphere. This took the appearance of a giant yellow globe with wings like bats on either side of a glass-eyed shaped viewport in the front. Several crystalline communication antennae extended from the top to the bottom of the globe. This structure hung back on a distant moon while the main fleet would engage the enemy. Within the sphere, Naga Sadow would meditate and aid his armada with the power of the dark side. This would take the form of dark side battle meditation. This would plague the thoughts, the minds of the enemies with fear and doubt, and would cause them to become sloppy, uncoordinated. But Sadow himself mostly used it to cast illusions from long distances. He either conjured images of terrifying creatures, or visually multiplied the number of his ships and fleet, making them look 2 or 3 times the size. But as the years went on, the fall of the Sith Empire and Exar Kun would not be the last time that the Daraphin-class battleship would arise in the lore. An homage would be paid to the ancient warship by none other than Revan and Malak. Once the two Sith Lords gained control of the Starforge, they would end up discovering blueprints for the design. Up until this point, they had been using repurposed Republic ships, so something from the ancient Sith Empire was needed to make their allegiance known and open. The Daraphin was then repurposed, and the classical design was put back into action. However, with it came its old weakness, the lack of deflector shields, so it came with improvements of point defense medium batteries. These were small blaster cannons placed around the hull, those specifically meant for the purpose of shooting down enemy missiles and smaller fighters. However, without proper shields in the more modern age of space combat, Daraphin casualties were extremely high in this war. However, that warship was more so meant to be a scary symbol rather than a real fighter. For Darth Revan's Armada, he would repurpose 2 of the Republic's own warship designs, those that had served him well during the Mandalorian Wars. This forced the Republic to use different designs to distinguish themselves against Revan during the Jedi Civil War. The first was the Interdictor-class cruiser, which was easily recognizable by its long hull, which split into 2 separate structures, one dorsal and one ventral. It was made reminiscent of the future Star Destroyer designs due to its T-shaped command tower situation at the stern. It was 600 meters in length and was loaded out with deflector shields, 5 turbo laser batteries, 6-point defense light batteries, and 3 tractor beams. Revan and Malak's flagship, the Leviathan, sported 4 gravity well projectors. We believe that the very last weapon was one created by Revan himself. The purpose of the gravity well was to create an interdiction field. This created an artificial gravity well that disabled hyperdrive capability in most starships. It was used to prevent ships from entering hyperspace, as well as draw ships out of hyperspace. The vessel was able to do this by tripping a hyperdrive's automatic failsafe that triggered when a gravity well was in the path of the ship. The Leviathan also had been the ship to devastate Terrace with an orbital bombardment. It was crewed by 5,224 men and could carry a company of 48 Sith Interceptor starfighters. Revan ended up feeding this design into the Starforge, and it was said that the Interdictor-class cruisers made by the Starforge were rivaled only in power by the Star Destroyers of the Imperials. What this meant was that Revan commanded a fighting force thousands of years ahead of its time. It is truly no wonder that he almost brought the Republic to its knees. But somehow, Revan commanded a ship type even scarier. Enter the Centurion-class battleship. It was twice as long as the Interdictors, clocking in at 1,200 meters, which is just 400 shy of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. This is even more reminiscent of the ship that it would inspire, as it sported a triangular arrowhead shape and a stern command tower. It had twice the firepower of the Interdictor, with 6 medium turbo laser batteries, 6 heavy ion cannons, 6-point defense light batteries, and 3 tractor beams. It carried a company of 96 Sith Interceptors and was crewed by around 32,000 men. Only a limited amount of these ships were available during the Mandalorian Wars, but once Revan got his hands on the design, he would mass produce them using the Starforge. The Centurion was also the type of battleship that Nihilus would resurrect, and the ship that he would turn into the Ravager on Malachor. Another one of these ships would also survive this era, and would go on to be used by Vitiate's fleet 300 years later. This ship was named the Tears of Terrace, as it itself was present during the planet's bombardment. As for starfighter designs, Revan used an ancient Rakatan design for the engines, and then pieced together its construction from a wide array of different cultures around the galaxy. It was a light snub fighter with minimal life support, no shields, and a light hull. Much akin to the TIE Fighter, it was very light, fast, and maneuverable. The ship was meant to be deployed in swarms. You'll recognize this as a trend of the Sith. Their short-range starfighters are often an afterthought in favor of the larger ships and weaponry. The Sith usually go light and cheap with starfighters, and deploy them in large swarms. This, in my opinion, is a bit of a mistake. In many stories, it's often the smaller fighters of the light side that manage to overcome the odds and to slip the bigger ship's defenses. But the Sith insist on putting all of their eggs into one basket by specializing in the big weapons and using starfighters as little more than a distraction. This is a problem across all Sith eras. We start to see some really intimidating firepower though in the reconstituted Sith Empire. Specifically though, we're talking about the Harrower-class Dreadnought. The Dreadnought continues the ongoing trend of triangular-shaped capital ships. However, they choose to split the tip down the middle to make the front of the ship form two prongs. Between those prongs lies two hangar bay openings stacked on top of each other. This allowed each of them to launch their starfighters directly out of the front end. This furthers the Sith philosophy of always facing an enemy head-on, as their short-range fighters can now catapult themselves directly forward at an opponent. Harrower-class dreadnoughts were also around 800 meters in length, and one of the most heavily armored ships of the ancient Sith empires. They were armed with sometimes more than 32 turbo laser batteries. This included an assortment of quad laser turrets, ion cannons, proton torpedo, and concussive missile launchers. They usually carried a complement of 95 Mark VI Supremacy-class starfighters, 32 B-28 Extinction-class bombers, and 35 trooper shuttles. This required a crew of 2,400 men, but could carry a legion of 7,300 Sith troopers. The Harrower would then see continued use as a reliable capital ship during the entire 30 years of Vitiate's empire and its war with the Republic. And wherever the Harrowers were, it is likely that they would be accompanied by a good number of the destroyers, known as the Terminus class. These ships were meant to serve as a multi-purpose vessel for a number of tasks, such as escort, search and destroy, or simply transportation of important personnel. They were also used for securing recently captured territories so that the Harrowers would not be tied down and could be redeployed elsewhere in the galaxy. They were about 500 meters in length and crewed about 520 men. They had a varying amount of turbo laser cannons, turrets, and concussive missile launchers, and usually just a single ion cannon. The most powerful of the Terminus-class destroyers was a ship known as the Ascendant Spear, a ship technically classified as a superweapon. Dark Council member Darth Mekis had designed a space station called the Sunraiser. This ship was a giant factory meant for the sole purpose of building superweapons in a very short span of time. Among these weapons was the Ascendant Spear, which measured exactly 1 mile long, which is just over the length of an Imperial Star Destroyer. This made it one of the 13 largest ships in the Sith Empire. The reason the Ascendant Spear was classified as a superweapon, though, was because of its unique capabilities. Darth Mekis created the ship to be the perfect union of man and machine. Through bionic implants, the ship's commander, Darth Carid, would commune with and control the ship directly, channeling the dark side through the ship. This enhanced its capabilities, allowing it to exceed its class of a 0.5 hyperdrive rating, which is already one of, if not the fastest type of hyperdrive in the entire galaxy, and then enhance the capabilities and effectiveness of the weapons to flawless precision. With this deadly power, Darth Carid regularly wiped out entire Republic fleets. Its weapons were capable of draining the shields of a Republic capital ship by 30%. Doing this with a single volley and cutting a cruiser cleanly in half. Rather than targeting computers in combat, the guns were being directed by the force-attuned accuracy of a Dark Lord of the Sith connecting directly to the ship. It was truly a weapon of devastating precision, and clearly showcased the brutality of the ancient empire. The only other weapon that matched this kind of destructive power, though, was the ship known as the Silencer, yet another masterpiece that we must attribute to the Sith Darth Mechis on the Sunraiser. The Silencer was a giant, rapidly recharging mega laser which was mounted in between the prongs of a Harrower-class dreadnought, taking the place of the hangar bay. This laser was referred to as a fleet killer because it had both the power and fire rate to destroy several capital ships in quick succession. And that, guys, is what the old Sith brought to the fight when their fleet came out of hyperspace. I believe these powerful weapons definitely live up to the standards set by these warmongering Lords of Darkness. As Palpatine once said, a Sith should always think grand, and I think these ships definitely are grand. But what do you think? Do you believe the Sith could do better? Should have done better? If you were to build a dark fleet of your own, which one of these would you want as your flagship? Let us know what you think down below. And thank you guys so much for watching the video. As always, may the Force be with you, and I'll see you back here again at the archives.